I'm Genevieve Ressler, a past president of the Health Physics Society, and I'm here today on behalf of the Health Physics Society History Committee, and I'm going to be talking with George Anastas, who is the current past president of the Health Physics Society. It's January 28th, 2003. We're in San Antonio at the mid-year meeting. And what we're going to be doing is talking to George, finding out a lot about him from birth on up through the current time as past president. I do want to mention that George is also a certified health physicist. So George, I know you're not going to have any difficulty talking, but I was wondering if you would kind of go back to the beginning. I think you're Greek. Am I right on that?
Yes, as a matter of fact, my mother and father are both Greek. They were Greek nationals living in Turkey at the time they met and were married. And right after World War I, my dad came to this country, and very shortly thereafter he sent for my mother and my oldest brother at the time. And growing up was fascinating. My parents spoke a combination of Greek, Turkish, Arabic, and English. So in the course of a conversation, I was exposed to a number of languages and a number of words, some of which I still remember. And it proved very, very interesting and challenging when I started to go to school and tried to decide where a verb in English would go. Would it go at the beginning of the sentence or the end of the sentence? And that was compounded in high school when I decided to take German, and there that language was completely different than either English, Arabic, or Turkish.
Well, you've come a long ways. I think you put all the verbs in the right place and everything. Well, you talked about school. Tell us a little bit about your background, your schooling, and what you went into, because we want to lead you up to how you got into health physics.
Certainly. I went to public school number 10 in Albany, New York, on the corner of Central Avenue and Lake Avenue, and some of the teachers there really took an interest in me because I had an interest in science. At that time, one of my brothers was going to Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and he was studying electrical engineering. This was back in the, let's say, before 1950. And I had an interest in science, not so much engineering, but science. And upon going to high school, I decided I wanted to be an engineer, get into science in a very, very hard way. And I was encouraged greatly by my parents because they believed very strongly in education. And it turned out that my brother Demo was the first of our family to go to college, graduate. He graduated with a degree in electrical engineering from RPI, a good school, great school. And so I jumped into chemistry, math, and science and loved it. Along the way, I fell in love with athletics, played a lot of basketball, played a lot of football.
Yes.
And I was very, very fortunate in high school athletic standpoint. Received a number of honors, and upon graduation, I was awarded a football scholarship to Colgate University in upstate New York. And I played there for a while, got injured, came back to Albany and finished up my degree there. However, in high school, probably the most important event in my whole life was meeting my future wife, Lila. And I saw her and fell in love with her. And in college, we were married, and we've been happily married now. Well, sometimes happily, sometimes very happy, other times not so happy, for over 40 years.
Yes, I was going to bring up Lila, just in case you didn't. And was it when you were in college that you began also teaching physics, and when you and Lila had your first son, Greg? Was that in college or graduate school?
That was in college. I was finished, Lila finished college a year or so before I did, because I had transferred, I had lost some credits, and we were married when I was essentially a first semester senior. And before the end of that academic year, Damon was born. And at the time I was teaching at the Schenectady Public School Systems. And he made a change in our life.
I have the wrong name, but then later we'll talk about your other children. You have a big family, and I don't have the sequence of names exactly right, but we'll get to that later. So then after that, you were at Colgate, I think.
No, I transferred from Colgate back to Albany, State University of New York at Albany, graduate in physics, and I taught physics and coached football for about 2 years until I realized that my love of science, I had to do more than what I was doing in high school, teaching physics and chemistry, coaching football. And I took a job with an organization in the governor's executive department in the state of New York. Nelson Rockefeller was governor at that time. And the name of the organization was the Office of Atomic Development. And I worked for a fellow by the name of Bob Vessels. And when I interviewed for Bob, he was a health physicist, and he interviewed me, and he was impressed that I had a degree in physics and was interested in nuclear energy and all. I asked him, I said, Bob, what's a health physicist? And he said, well, we do a lot of work with radiation and radiation protection and things like that, but you'll learn more about it as you go along. And with Bob, I got to know the Health Physics Society because he was a member, and I used to borrow his copy of the journal and read up about what Casey Morgan and John Auxier and all these folks were saying about health physics. And I even ran across some articles by a person who became one of my mentors, Newell Standard.
And about what year was that?
This was in 1967, 66, 67.
Yes, yes.
And when I interviewed with Bob Vessels, he said you had to take a course from Bob Ryan at RPI. And I said, well, what is a Bob Ryan? I know what RPI is. And he said, well, he teaches health physics, but he's a good guy. So as part of the program with the state, I took Bob Ryan's course and in radiological engineering, and I met my second love, which is health physics and radiation safety. And after I finished the course with Bob, I was working with a fellow by the name of Joe Cinto, who then went back to the AEC at that time, but he was a chem engineer and he wanted to be a health physicist. And he had worked for Vitro for a number of years, and I learned a lot of health physics from Bob Ryan, Bob Vessels, and Joe Cinto. And the Health Physics Society journal really piqued my curiosity, and that really helped. And those folks helped me get a scholarship, a fellowship to the University of Minnesota to get my master's in public health with specialization in radiological health physics.
And who are some of the people there that you worked with? Was Don Barber there at the time?
Oh, Don Barber was my advisor, a super fellow, outstanding. And he, I believe, was deeply involved in the history committee of the Health Physics Society at one time. And if Bob Vessels and Bob Ryan and Joe Cinto got the fire going, I think Don Barber and Connie Straub really poured the fuel on. Mm-hmm. So as part of the program there, I was assigned to Hanford, and I spent some marvelous time there working with, well, being acquainted with folks, other health physics folks, including Ken Hyde, internal dosimetrist at Hanford. You know, I can't say
wonderful person.
Oh, tremendous.
Yes.
And able to explain internal dosimetry to really a neophyte at that particular point in time.
Yes. Was he doing whole body counting back then?
Yes, he was.
Yes.
And he made arrangements for me to be whole body counted. And at the time, I had my whole body count. They said, well, you've got low body fat. I didn't have a lot of sodium. Right.
Potassium. Oh, you had a lot of potassium.
Yeah.
A lot of potassium,
yeah.
right.
And so good times were had there, and I also worked with Wally Howell at Hanford. He really taught me the beginnings of what I'll call applied health physics. This is swinging a meter, and when you swing a meter, you know what it means and what it doesn't mean.
Now, I've lost track. Are you still in school now, or have you graduated?
Still in school.
You're still in
school?
Still
in school.
Okay.
Still in school. Still in school. Now, during this period of time, Lila, bless her heart, moved from Albany to 748 Tatum Street in St. Paul, Minnesota. We had a basement apartment. We had 2 kids at that time. Had Damon, and then about a year and a half, 2 years after we had Damon, we had another son, Greg. And so she came along, and we lived there for about a year and a half.
And survived the winters
Oh,
and the cold?
Oh, dear. I'd never been so cold in my life. St. Paul, that
but it
one
kept
winter.
You awake.
Yes, kept us out.
Yes.
I used to cut the oil in the car with kerosene and bring the battery into the house, and we still couldn't get the car started. But she weathered that and came out to Hanford with the kids, and we had a marvelous time there. If I could jump ahead to about 2 years ago, when we were at Hanford, the folks there, very, very appreciative, made arrangements for us to go out on the site, which I'll talk about later, but we also had the opportunity to go by the house we lived in on Newcomer Street in Richland, Washington, and brought back some very, very fond memories.
And let's jump ahead a little bit, because you've been talking about Lila, and of course, as you know, she's a good friend of mine, and if we can get a close-up of this, this is a picture of George and Lila taken probably about a year ago or a year and a half ago. And I want to mention, too, that George has done a lot of things, as you'll see as we get farther along in the talk here. But Lila's a unique person, too. And why don't you tell a little bit about Lila, the writer?
I don't think we have enough time to talk about everything I'd like to say about Lila, but
well,
I'll
you
give
can tell
you
a little bit right now.
I'll give you a synopsis. Lila's father was a physician and was a very, very good writer, excellent writer. She began writing quite a bit in high school and in college, and it all sort of came to fruition in a way that she was approached to do a book on nursing, careers in nursing. And she did that for the National League of Nursing, and it was just they loved it, Well, that led to another book put out by Prevention Magazine called Listen to Your Body. And basically is a list of symptoms and what the best responses would be for those symptoms. And that book has been translated, let's see if I can get this right, into Chinese, French, Spanish, Australian. There's an Australian version, there's a British version, and an Italian version. And we think it's probably well over 1 million copies, both hard copy and soft copy. Excellent writer, and she's helped me. I hate to admit this, but she's done quite a bit of proofreading of some of my material, and it's really
you're both
helped.
in the medical field, so you could help and understand each other. Lila, I believe, is a nurse, isn't she?
Yes. She graduated magna cum laude from Syracuse University School of Nursing. So she has a bachelor's degree in nursing, and more recently she received a master's from California State University, Sacramento in counseling. So she's a unique individual in that she has a scientific technical background in nursing, is an outstanding writer in the medical field, and is also a counselor.
Okay, well, now I took you off track a little bit, but let's go back to Hanford.
Okay.
And you worked there.
Yeah.
And at the time you had 2 children, and you were still a graduate student.
Still a graduate student, and at Hanford I spent time in the 200 area working at Purex, which I liked very, very much. Also spent some time at the Plutonium Recycled Test Reactor, PRTR, down in the 300 area. But the folks I met there, Joe Soldat, Ron Catherine, Wally Howell, Ken Hyde that I mentioned, George Backman, just the cream of the health physics profession at that point in time, not from an academic sense, but from a practical sense. I still have and refer to some of the papers that Joe Soldat wrote in the 60s and 70s about iodine and iodine deposition. And Joe, if you look at this videotape, I want to assure you those papers still are very, very valuable references for me, and I'm sure the rest of the folks as well.
He's still an expert in iodine.
Oh, absolutely.
Why don't you explain one word you used, because I think it's sort of interesting, and I think people maybe viewing this tape won't know what the Purex plant is. It sounds like bleach or something like that.
Plutonium, uranium recycle facility. Basically, it was it's the most recent process utilized to separate plutonium and uranium from fission products, and most notably at Hanford, the plutonium was used in national defense purposes. It's a process whereby reactor fuel is just chopped up, dissolved, and the meat, the fuel, is then dissolved in a dissolver, of course, and the liquid is then passed through ion exchange resins, countercurrent columns to separate out these materials in very, very high purity state. There were other processes used throughout the history, the bismuth phosphate process, a process using hexone, but the best chemical process, most recently used, was the Purex process.
And that's our lecture for today, isn't it?
Yes.
We're teaching students.
Yes.
Well,
one more step. Occasionally the dissolvers had to be removed and disposed, and one of my jobs at Purex was to assist in removing these dissolvers, a dissolver out of the cell, putting it on a railroad car, and putting it in the tunnel out at Hanford.
And now again, remind us about what year is this?
Oh, this is in the late 60s, 68, 69, somewhere.
So we're into the Cold War effort at Hanford, very busy times. And now we're tracking you across the country from the Northeast through the north, the far north in Minnesota, to Washington, the Hanford site. We know that you've ended up in Albuquerque, but I know you went to California too.
Oh, there were a couple.
How does that fit in?
A couple spots in between. From Hanford, Lyle and I and the kids went back to Minnesota, lived in married student housing, finished up my degree, and we got out of there before the weather got real cold. I graduated, I think it was December 16th. I think the 17th, I loaded up a U-Haul truck and drove back to New York, and Lyle and the kids flew down to Florida for her parents. Is interesting, and my life would have changed, and I don't know which way, probably better. I had applied for a position with Ron Catherine back in Hanford, and I'd also applied for a position back in New York, and the position in New York opened up, and I accepted it, and 2 days later, Ron Catherine called me up and said, "Come on out." And I had problems saying that I really can't renege on the commitment I already made. So we went back to New York, and back in New York, I went back to work for the state, and I worked on the state emergency response plan for nuclear facilities, did some more radioactive materials licensing, coordination, and our third child, Deanne, was born in New York, and then about 2 years after that, our fourth child, Zoe Melina, good Greek name, she was born, and then one winter I was shoveling the driveway to our house, and our driveway went up to the street. I'd finished shoveling it, and the snow plow came by and packed the snow in tight as a drum. And at that point in time, I said, we're going to get out of here. I'm going to go to a warm climate where I don't see snow. And so I put my resume out, and San Diego Gas and Electric, which was about as far from Albany, New York, as you could get and stay in the continental United States anyway, offered me a position, and went there. And Lila and the kids followed shortly thereafter.
Lila and now 4 kids.
Now 4 kids, yep.
To California.
Well, what happened, I flew back, and we drove from Albany to Washington, D.C., where I met with a bunch of friends, where we stayed with friends that worked at the AEC at the time, the Atomic Energy Commission. And then we drove down to Alabama, where her grandfather and other folks had settled many, many years ago, Florence, Alabama. And then we drove to Houston, Texas, and visited my brother, and then to Safford, Arizona, where we visited her uncle, and then we made it to San Diego. And there was a culture shock for the kids coming from upstate New York to San Diego. But the kids acclimated very, very well, and so did Lila, and that's where she did a lot of her writing for the books in San Diego. And we loved San Diego, marvelous place. And in San Diego, I became active with the San Diego chapter of the Health Physics Society, and I got to meet the person who was running the program at San Diego State. His name was Les Scolil. And I became fast friends with him, and then one evening I ran into this fellow I'd met some time ago, Newell Stannard. And he and his wife, Grace, lived about half a mile from us.
Oh, my.
And so we became very, very fast friends. We had them over for dinner and all, and became very, very close. Now, this was about 1976. And so a story with Newell is that at the time I had a sports car, and we were running a certification review course for the San Diego chapter of the Health Physics Society. And we were taping it, audio taping it, and I picked Newell up, and we were late getting to the session that he was going to teach. And so the course was being held at the GA facility, the Gulf Atomics facility in La Jolla. And I'm roaring along, and I'm not paying attention, and Newell said, "Oh, I think we're just passing it, passing the entrance." And so I downshifted and turned into it, going about 40 miles an hour or so. And we pulled up. Newell didn't say a word. We pulled up. We made it. We got there and took my seatbelt off. And Newell said, "That was quite a turn," in this very dry humor. So, yeah, we became very, very fast friends.
And Newell, as people now know, he's a past president of the Health Physics Society. He was very active in the History Committee and getting their work started. Where was he at that time in his health physics career?
Okay, as I recall, he was president probably in 69 or 70, and this was 1976. He had retired from the University of Rochester, where he ran that program up there so very, very well, and graduated some marvelous people, folks that were, and I'm going to miss one or more of them, and I apologize for that, but Otto Robbie was a graduate of his, Marvin Goldman, both presidents of the Health Physics Society, and one of my favorite presidents, Paul Rohr, was one of his students too, and there are probably a few more, and if I miss them, I apologize, but Newell did a marvelous, marvelous job. Oh, I think Charlie Meinhold was one of his students too.
And Newell was probably at that time busy writing that big, thick book that we all are familiar with?
Almost.
Yes.
One day, it was probably 1977. He came down. He came down the house and said, he's writing this book for Battelle, and he was wondering if I'd take a look at a chapter, and I did. And I gave him some comments on it, and then he and Lila then talked and collaborated and all, and it turned out that Lila this is before computers. Lila was using the same typist on one of her books that Newell was using. Okay, so there was a connection there. So they collaborated a little bit. And then shortly thereafter, I saw the galley proofs of the book, and my eyes opened. I had no idea. Newell, such a wonderful person, very unassuming. He's working on a little book for Battelle, okay? It was an epistle. So I saw the galley proofs, and shortly thereafter, in the, I believe, the mid-'80s or so, late '80s, it was published.
And I understand now, I got the first version, which is very thick. I understand it's in 2 volumes.
Two volumes now, so,
yeah.
So you don't hurt yourself lifting it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, Newell did a lot to inspire you. You obviously consider him very much a mentor, but eventually I hope you'll tell us a little bit about what you did to recognize him with the special series,
Sure.
chapter series. But
Yeah.
maybe there's something in between we should cover first.
I finished up in San Diego in 1986 or so, and it was time to move on to another position. And the real reason why the traffic in San Diego was getting horrendous. And we were going to stay in California, and I obtained a position in Sacramento as Director of Environmental Health and Safety at the California State University, Sacramento, where I had the multitude of responsibilities, not just radiation, but chemical safety, hazardous waste disposal, asbestos, lead. I mean, there's a whole potpourri of things I had to do. So we moved up there, and at that time, our 5th child had been born in 1978, Nikki, and so the 3 of us at that time, because both the boys, the sons, had graduated from Berkeley, and one daughter, Deanne, was in the process of graduating from the University of San Francisco. So Zoe and Nikki essentially moved up with us. The rest of the flock was starting to spread their wings, which was very,
and your
very
children
good.
are all athletes too, in addition to their own careers.
Oh, well, let me take a couple minutes and talk about
Let's show the
kids.
picture. It's a little ahead of where you are in life, but I think if we look at that, you'll see, and I don't expect you're going to look at this and give all the names, but on the picture we have the children, George and Lila, and children and some grandchildren, just to give you a feeling.
And son-in-laws and a daughter-in-law, and let me just say a few words about the crew there. Our children and their husbands or their wives. Damon was a rower at UC Berkeley. He was a physics major, by the way, graduated in physics, and married Nevenka. Damon is 6'4", 6'5", and Nevenka is 6'2". She's also an attorney and also the mother of 3 of our grandkids. I've never gotten into an argument with a female attorney that's as tall as I am, but we do have some discussions. Deanne is there, and her husband, Ron. Deanne went to University of San Francisco on a volleyball scholarship and was captain of the team for several years. And additionally, we have Zoe and her husband. She's there, and they have a child and another one on the way. And then we have Nikki and her husband, Tom, and just a raft of grandchildren in there. And I'm not going to bore everyone by naming them. Let's put it this way.
We're not going to challenge you by asking you to go through a
Please.
name.
How about the date of birth? Now, Lila could do that.
So
Lila could do that. let's put it this way. Lila and I are exceedingly proud of our kids, what they have done. They are adults now, and we will continue to spoil our grandchildren. So that's how we feel about the family.
Okay, then back to, now we're in the history here. We're in Sacramento.
We're in Sacramento, and I'm Director of Environmental Health and Safety at California State University, Sacramento. And a number of the people in radiation safety in the area sort of got together and decided to form the Sierra Nevada chapter of the Health Physics Society. And we did that, and there were a number of folks in Nevada, Carson City and Reno, that also wanted to form this chapter, and we did. And I had heard from some friends of mine in San Diego that Newell was doing okay, but really the book was finished, and that was very important to him. There was a bit of a letdown, and so I said, hey, we need a theme for our annual meeting, and let's call it the J. Newell Standard Lecture Series, Excellence in Radiation Protection. Well, they thought that was a grand idea, and it's a good idea to do something like that when people can come and enjoy the occasion. And Newell attended the first 9 years. He and his wife Helena come up and just enjoyed it. It's held on the shores of Lake Tahoe in the spring, generally in April, and it's attended by anywhere from 50 to 100 folks from California, Nevada, and the rest of the country. And the president-elect of the society generally shows up, and Newell attended the first 9. He was but at number 10, he really couldn't travel too much. But what this gentleman does, he goes to UC San Diego and prepares a tremendous videotape message, which is his way of thanking everyone and providing a theme for the meeting.
And this is, I think, when I first became familiar with you, because I was editor of the Health Physics newsletter at the time, and you'd send us these beautiful pictures from the meeting with the beautiful blue water of the lake in the background. That caught my attention, and the fact that you were recognizing Newell, who is a absolute pillar of the society and the profession, is how I became familiar with this.
You know, it was it's a good tradition. It is ongoing, and it's a living way to express our appreciation for what this particular individual has done for health physics and radiation safety.
And I think it was about that time, somewhere in there, now I don't know if I have the year right, but came to my attention that, well, you had been on the board of directors, though, previous to when I called you and said, George, how about running for president-elect of the society? What years were you on the board of directors?
Oh, I think it was 99, 98, 99, that time frame. And I had served 2 terms. It was a 3-year term, and I received this phone call out of the blue from Ms. Ressler here. And she said, George, would you like to run for the board of directors? And I said, I can't do that. I mean, this has got to be somebody really, pronounced and honorable, et cetera, et cetera.
You got it, yes.
And I thanked her, but then I said, well, let me think about it a little bit. And I thought about it, and then I talked to some of my friends, and they were very, very positive about it. And then I called up Newell, and Newell, I got a problem. And he said, what is it, George? Something in the book? And I'll tell you about that in a second, too. And I told him, he said, well, You've got some good ideas, some different ideas, and it's probably good for the society to have some new blood, some new ideas brought forward. I'd also talked with Otto Robbie, another pillar in the community.
And another person who had gone through the presidency.
Yes, yes, and a few others. And then I called you back and I said, yeah, let's try for it. Mm-hmm. And I did. And when I did, I had a lot of apprehension about it. And the person I was running against, I had utmost respect for. Just tremendous individual. I said, hey, for this, no problem. You know, I'll work it out. And then the ballot came out, and I got phone calls from around the country. Bob Ryan, other folks that I had run into, worked with over the years, either emailed me or called me and said, you know, is this for real? And I said, yes, yes, yes. And I received a phone call in January from Ruth McBurney. And she said, you want the good news or the bad news? I said, well, okay, you know, one, good, fine. I said, well, you know, what's the bad news? And I figured she'd say, well, you lost, and good shot. She said, well, no, George, you won. I didn't say a word. And she said, are you there? I said, you're pulling my leg. You're kidding me. No, it's absolutely correct. And I went home, told Lila, and I think she was more excited than I was at the time. I was sort of numb. And because then and now I look at being president of the Health Physics Society, really the world premier radiation safety, radiation protection organization, as the pinnacle of a professional career. And so, yes, we did
this
that.
time, too, didn't you retire for the first time?
Yes, yes.
Making it a little bit easier, perhaps, to devote your time to the travels as president-elect and the work as president?
Yeah. At that time, the university was very, very busy. It was in the middle of, we just finished up U.S. track and field trials. I had been working with the security people and the police and the health center and the National Guard on getting ready for that, running exercises, because we were concerned about a terrorist event at that time. And I was pooped. I was burned out. And at that time, I went in and said, hey, this is very, very important to me. I really want to make this presidency work. I want to do a good job for the society. I'm going to need some time off. Well, at that time, they couldn't allow that. They were just too busy. And so I said, okay, I'm going to retire. And so I did. And I was able to devote, I did consulting also, and was able, Lila and I were able to visit the chapters, and the chapter folks were just marvelous. That was probably one of the best years, the best year that we spent together. We really enjoyed it. And also, we stayed at Jen Ressler's schoolhouse for 3 or 4 days in Minnesota, beautiful in the fall of 2001.
Yes, and something that you probably don't know that I know, but as you were traveling, I mean, you know that Lila did this. She took pictures. For each chapter you visited, she gave her little summary, doing very well as a writer, and you have a big scrapbook. I think that someday people from chapters, people from the society should read that, because it's a very, very nice story about the wonderful people in the field of health physics. And that was your year as president-elect. Well, then you became president, and I wanted to look for another picture here. And this is one that I think what was happening here is that, George, you're on the right of the people looking at this, and on the left is Dick Burke, who's the executive secretary of the Health Physics Society. Now, the way I understand this, George is trying to explain to Dick something that happened, and Dick is not believing it. Now, you tell your version.
This particular picture is taken in Tampa at the annual meeting last year, and it was taken at the restaurant, the Colombian restaurant there. And basically, Dick had asked me where I had put the attendee list. And basically I'm saying, you know, Dick, I have no idea. Now, a word about Dick Burke. The success of any president of the society is due in great part to the dedication of Dick Burke and the very, very hard work of the staff of the Secretariat. Throughout my career, I've worked with a lot of people, many organizations. I'm a member of a number of professional organizations. Nowhere in my experience have I met a crew as dedicated as there at Burke & Associates. This is not a commercial for Burke & Associates, but a big measure of, if I had any success as president, go to two people, two organizations. One, Lila, keeps me on the straight and narrow, and the other is Dick Burke and Burke & Associates.
And this would probably be a good time to mention something that came to my mind as you were talking about the time and the rigors of the years as president-elect and president and even past president, is that I would not want to discourage any of those up-and-coming young health physicists from running for presidency because they think it's a lot of work. And a lot of the work is taken care of and the help is taken care of by Dick Burke. He doesn't tell us as presidents how we should be president, but he certainly is there supporting us, and the whole crew does.
Yes. One of the items I talked about in a number of chapter meetings is that the society needs some new ideas, new blood, and I would strongly encourage that chapters take a look at who's in the chapter, identify some people and get behind them and work with them to enter into what I'll call the management of the Health Physics Society. And whether it be on the board of directors or running for president or serving on a committee or even chairing a committee, this is the best way that we can make the society more relevant to today. 1975 is not going to come back again. I'm terribly sorry. But the year 2004, and we're at 2003 right now, is on the horizon. We need more prospective, can-do attitudes than retrospective. But that's...
Yeah, let's get to, you mentioned the young people, and I have a picture here of, we're challenging the photographer here, but a picture of George as president of the society, and he's surrounded on here by other board members, and you see that there are people of a lot of different ages, but what we are seeing is a lot of new, young people coming into active roles in the society. And I think while we have the camera focused on a picture, what I want to lead up to, George, is asking you to discuss some of the really significant initiatives that you started as president of the society. And maybe you could start out by talking about this, this picture, who's on it and what you're doing.
Yeah. On the camera's left is a fellow from the IAEA. His name is Hamar Marabat. And he is probably the most dynamic individual with vision that I have run across out of the IAEA. And one of his programs is called the Model Countries Programs, where the IAEA is trying to improve the radiation safety infrastructure in a number of nations. Now, one of the reasons why Hamar and I hit it off so well, two of my mentors worked with the IAEA in developing this program, and that's Lester Rogers, the very first Elda Anderson Award winner, and Dr. Frank Bradley. They worked to establish this program back in 1992, 1993. And Hamar and I, the picture is showing us looking at some instruments, and they're part of a program whereby volunteers, including chapters, would go and assist countries in trying to improve the radiation safety infrastructure. For too many years, the Health Physics Society has kept its knowledge under its hat. And one of my initiatives was to get more involved in the international arena so that our knowledge and our expertise can be shared and can be used by these other countries in the Model Countries program with the IAEA in improving their radiation safety infrastructure. And indeed, if you go to some of these countries and look at the calibration facilities or lack thereof, the instrumentation, the regulatory framework, the inventory, the control of materials, there's a lot that we can do to help them as our colleagues. And I'd also like to point out that the Health Physics Society for many, many years had chapters in the United Kingdom, France, and overseas. Excuse me. One of my initiatives is to broaden our outreach to our colleagues in these other countries, our members that are in these other countries, and work with them to improve the radiation safety infrastructure in those countries.
And you've had a really good response from the chapters in the society, and I didn't warn you about this, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but you might want to mention some of the chapters who are involved in this initiative.
Certainly, certainly. Off the top of my head, we have the South Texas chapter, and they're like a bunch of racehorses. They want to go, 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 and they're heavily involved. Bob Emery is one of the leaders there. And then we have the Northern California chapter with Howard Dixon and Roger Cloping working with Panama. And on the list is the Florida chapter and Rod Nichols. We're trying to work with Jamaica. We've got Heidi Volick and that crew up at the Northeastern New York chapter of the Health Physics Society that want to get involved. And today I was talking with some folks from New England, and they're about ready to tear off and do some science teacher training for the folks in Portugal. Andy Karam from the Western New York chapter has already gone to Lithuania, and we hope that work will continue. And I'll be doing some work along these ways. Too long we've turned inward and have worried about such things as LNT, and does LNT, the linear non-threshold theory, hold to 2 microrem, 5 millirem, and I think we have to look outside the United States. And if you mentioned 5 millirem to someone in another country that's worried about calibration of sources and diagnostic x-rays, I think they'd probably ask you to leave, because they're dealing with real doses, significant doses to large numbers of people, and therein we can provide a tremendous resource to help them reduce those kinds of unnecessary exposures.
Let's also talk about the other really big, I shouldn't say really big, I guess, but the other initiative that you started as a part of your presidency, and that's Homeland Security, and how it all folded in with 9/11, and really what's happening today here at the mid-year meeting in San Antonio.
Certainly. I was at Starbucks at 7 a.m. Albuquerque time, and someone came in and said a plane has just crashed into the World Trade Center. And immediately I thought about the World Trade Center bombing that had occurred and all, and I said, well, what kind of plane was it? And he said he thought it was a commercial airliner. Well, I grabbed my coffee and went to the office and turned on the television, and it was a commercial airliner, and the second one hit, and we were glued to the television, and it was a very, very scary time. And I made a vow then that I was going to do something. And I also made a vow that I can disclose now that I would work very, very hard for the society to do something about that. And in talking with Lila that night, we were on pins and needles. And then the plane, that day, then the plane went into the Pentagon, and then the plane crashed in Pennsylvania. It was a very scary time, and it sort of strengthened my resolve to do something. Well, the very next week we had been scheduled to go to Washington and do our congressional visits. Well, that was postponed. That was totally postponed. And during the next several weeks I made some plans, and then another one of my very, very dear friends, Alan Brodsky, called me up. And he said, we have to do something as a society. We've been sitting on the sidelines too long. I said, what are we going to do? He said he was going to have this meeting in November, and it was going to be about Homeland Security, and he's gotten tremendous responses for it. I said, let's get after that. Keep me advised, and if I can get there, I will. I was not able to get there. After the meeting, he and I talked for quite a while, and I did the congressional visits in December, and I was able to meet with the chairman of the NRC and a number of commissioners, some high-ranking folks at the DOE, and basically I said, we are volunteering to help. And at that time, Chairman Meserve said that, well, you know, there are some things you can do, and we did a little brainstorming right there in his office. It blew my mind. I'd never sat down for 45 minutes with a chairman of the NRC before. And we laid out some things to do, and he pointed us in a couple directions. And shortly thereafter, I wrote a letter to President Bush, which I believe is still on the website there. And basically I said, as president of the Health Physics Society, you have called for volunteers. We're volunteering.
This was President George of the Health Physics Society to President George of the United States.
That's correct.
Yes.
That's correct. And I learned sometime afterwards that the White House had made copies of that and sent it around to the agencies. And then all of a sudden, things started to come together, and that we were put in contact with the Department of Justice, and they had funds for the Homeland Defense Equipment Reuse Program, where DOE would refurbish equipment and get it in good shape. And these are the folks at Oak Ridge and the Metals and Equipment Recycle Center. And Rich Meehan was one of them, and Vince Adams, another fellow down there. The equipment would be sent to first responders in various states, and then the Health Physics Society volunteers would attend training with them and provide follow-on training, instrument maintenance, and instrument calibration. And what I have found is that everyone throws stones at people in Washington, D.C. Well, I guess I've been fortunate. I've run across a number of people in Washington, D.C. that are like health physicists. They're doers. They want to get things done. And they'll work the system and get it done. And right now, out of the 10 metropolitan areas, 5 of them have equipment, and the training is going on, and the Health Physics Society chapters are either on board or in the process of getting on board. So yes, I believe I have initiated my commitment that the society will do something about this.
And the society, as evidenced by this meeting with the topic of Homeland Security, is very active. You might want to mention that John Auxier, another past president of the society, is now going to be chairing the Homeland Security Committee.
Yes.
I guess I just mentioned it, didn't I?
Well, you did, but Alan Brodsky brought this Homeland Security Committee concept from an idea in November of 2001 to where we are now, where there is a committee, they're preparing documentations. We are coordinating with the Department of Justice, the Department of Energy, the first responders in many, many states, and today's Tuesday, in Wednesday, this Homeland Defense Equipment Reuse Program will be going nationwide. It will not just be the 10 largest metropolitan areas, but nationwide. And there's a role for the Health Physics Society, important role to play in that. Additionally, other professional safety societies are interested in partnering with the Health Physics Society in Homeland Defense. And what I've been hearing is that they're tired of writing position papers. They want to get out and do something. And they're thinking about partnering with us with regard to radiation safety without borders. And I look at these two initiatives by the Health Physics Society as part of a reemergence, not re-engineering, but reemergence of the dedication and the can-do attitude of the society for looking forward and responding to not only radiation safety needs, but humanitarian needs and national defense needs. And because of this, I am extremely proud to be a member of the Health Physics Society.
Something we should bring up, because you mentioned on 9/11 that you were in Albuquerque, and we don't want to leave out how you happen to now continue across the country and end up in Albuquerque.
Right. We were in Sacramento, and I had retired, and I was doing the visits to the chapters and all, and I had lost some weight. I went to the doctor, and the doctor said, "You're fine. You're strong as a horse." I said, "What's going on?" And he said, "Well, you're an engineer too." I said, "Yes." He said, "You've made too many changes at once." And I said, "Well, what? I should go back eating hamburgers?" He said, "No." And it came down that really I should go back to work full time. And so I was offered a position with the Environmental Evaluation Group, and I'm a nuclear engineer health physicist in Albuquerque with the Environmental Evaluation Group. And our responsibility is to look after the waste isolation plant on behalf of the state of New Mexico. We've been in Albuquerque now for a year and a half or so, and we love it. We love it very, very much. And that's where we are now, and for the near term.
As you've been talking, it's very obvious to me that health physics has been very good to you. That comes out, I think, strong and clear. You've done a lot for the profession, also, and a lot for the society. I wonder if at this moment in time, 2003, can you project ahead? What do you think is the future of our field and of the society?
Okay. One of the, I've seen a number of reports and assessments of what's going to happen in radiation safety. One of the drivers, which I really don't agree with, is that there's a need for another 50 nuclear power plants that have to be online by the year 2020. Okay, and with that, there'd be a growth in the radiation safety and health physics associated with that. It's 17 years from now. There's no way you can get another 50,000 megawatts of nuclear capacity on board. And so basically, I've taken a real hard look at the demographics of the folks in the society and what the challenges are, what the needs are, and part of my assessment has led me that medical health physics is extremely important. extremely important. And for too long, we have given it a little short shrift. All right? And so I think that is something we have got to spend more time on. I have attempted to revitalize with a lot of hard work from Karen Langley and Jean St. Germain and a bunch of folks in the medical health physics section to get that going again very strongly. And let's face it, that's where the population dose and the avoidable population dose resides today. All right? Sometimes I get very, very frustrated with people talking about the difference between 15 millirem a year and 20 millirem a year. There is no difference. There is no difference. When I first became president, I asked a number of questions in the newsletter, and one of which is if LNT is correct, and it is for high dose rate, somebody show me some information that shows it holds down to 2 millirem, 10 millirem, 100 millirem, and no one has come forward. And my view right now is that LNT does not, for all intents and purposes, exist below several rem a year. And that, that's well in the same range of occupational exposure. And I think we have spent, as a society, too much time arguing about how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. It's not there. I haven't seen it.
Well, we certainly learned a lot about you today, George. You as a person, you as a family man, your involvement. Many health physicists are not only involved in science, but you have been involved in many other things, athletics and so on. What have we left out? Is there anything that we haven't covered in your very interesting life and the life with your family?
A couple things. Health physicists are doers. Anyone who can do calculations on internal dosimetry and things of that nature can really do anything. They can work in industrial hygiene, occupational safety, and things of that nature. One of our drawbacks is lack of communication, and I'll say it again, we keep our knowledge under our hat. What will work very, very well is a lean, mean, focused organization that can move rapidly, that can respond accurately, scientifically, with the best interests of not only radiation safety, but the best interests of the prudent allocation of resources. It makes no sense to spend many, many dollars on reducing a dose, a projected dose, from 10 millirem to 5 millirem when we have homeless people, we have illegal drugs problems, we have kids that are hungry, kids that are not being educated, we have spousal abuse, and these sorts of things. I think we have to stand up and look beyond LNT, the difference between 25 millirem a year and 20 millirem a year, and be more in tune with what is important to society. And in that way, society will listen to us with a better view of what health physicists are. We are not nerds only worrying about radiation exposure. We can look beyond that, and we have humanity as really our client in our mission to assist humanity.
George, I wonder if it's because you learned so many languages as a child. You certainly express yourself very well. This has been a very easy interview to have someone who talks so easily and so focused. I think I'd like to just say our appreciation to the Health Physics Society History Committee. We've been talking to George Anastas, past president of the Health Physics Society, and I've enjoyed this very much, and I think you did too, didn't you, George?
Yes, very much so. It allowed me to articulate some of the things that I hope health physicists will take a look at, take to heart, and move this profession forward into the 21st century and not retrospectively back into 1975. We have some tremendous challenges. Let's go do it, Health Physics Society.